You must understand, my dear friend, that every human being walks with a silent companion, an unseen double, whose footsteps echo beneath the surface of consciousness. What you call your sensitivity, your softness, your strange ability to feel the invisible undercurrents of other people's emotions, these are not random traits. They were shaped by an ancient dialogue between your ego and your shadow, a negotiation that has been going on since the first moment you learned that the world is both wondrous and wounding. Today, I want to speak to you not as a lecturer, not as a scholar of the psyche, but as one who has witnessed the unfolding of countless souls who, like you, carry an unusual attunement to the hidden layers of reality. The empath stands at a threshold, a liminal doorway between the life they were conditioned to live and the life their deeper self has always intended for them. Yet standing between these two lives is the shadow, the guardian of everything, repressed, forgotten, denied, abandoned. And so the empath often grows up not understanding that the very forces that wounded them were also the very forces that forged them for a destiny. The shadow tries to obscure. When you look back on your childhood, you may recall moments that feel strangely symbolic rather than simply biographical. A room that always felt heavier than it should. A parent whose silence felt louder than their words. A dream you had as a child that seemed to chase you into adulthood. A recurring image of being underwater, of losing your voice, of trying to run but feeling anchored to the ground. These are not mere psychological residues. They are messages sent from the deeper psyche, trying to warn you that the life awaiting you would require more than logic, more than conformity, more than the ability to survive. It would require the ability to see into the soul. You see, the empath lives in two worlds simultaneously, the outer world of appearances and the inner world of meaning. While others respond to events, the empath responds to atmospheres. While others hear words, the empath hears intentions. While others see behaviors, the empath sees wounds. This capacity, however, is also the reason the shadow has worked so tirelessly to keep you small. For the shadow knows that if you ever fully step into your authentic life, into the truth of who you are, beneath all conditioning, you would dissolve the old patterns that fed it for so long. The shadow is not evil by nature. It is simply everything you were convinced you must not be in order to be loved, accepted, or safe. For the empath, the shadow becomes a vast container of suppressed fire, anger you were not allowed to feel, boundaries you were not allowed to assert, intuitions you were told to ignore, truths you were punished for knowing too early. It is the reservoir of all the emotional knowledge that frightened the adults around you. Because you sensed too much, because you knew too early, because you felt too deeply, the world projected its discomfort onto you, shaping your shadow into a prison rather than an ally. And so the empath grows up with an inner contraction, a subtle belief that stepping fully into their real life would be too dangerous, too disruptive, too overwhelming. They walk through the world half present, half dreaming, carrying other people's storms as if they were responsible for calming them. What they do not realize is that this pattern absorbing what is not theirs was once a survival strategy. When a child senses conflict, tension, or emotional instability in the home, the psyche adapts by becoming hyper-aware of the unconscious states of others. You learn to detect the emotional weather before anyone else named it. You learn to neutralize chaos before it erupted. You learn to be invisible when necessary and to be everything someone needed when their pain grew too large. This is how your shadow was shaped, not as a dark creature following you, but as a protector that took on the burdens your young self could not carry. Yet eventually, Life brings every empath to a crossroads, and this is precisely where you stand now. The old identity, the one shaped by wounds, hyper-attunement, and emotional labor, cannot accompany you into the next chapter. It would only distort your calling. It would only tether you to lives that feed on your light. This is the moment the shadow panics, for it senses that transformation threatens its role as guardian. It whispers doubts, resurrects old fears, reminds you of every past moment when stepping forward led to rejection or pain. This is not sabotage. It is the shadow trying to keep you safe based on outdated information. But every archetypal journey requires a moment when the old protector must surrender its authority to the emerging self. The empath's emerging self is not soft in the way the world imagines. It is soft the way water is soft, yielding yet unstoppable, humble yet ancient, gentle yet capable of wearing down mountains. In my studies of the psyche, I often describe this self as the center and totality of the personality, the inner nucleus around which all complexes, archetypes, emotions, and memories revolve. The empath senses this self earlier than most people. They feel its pull during moments of emotional clarity, synchronicity, or uncanny intuition. They catch glimpses of it in dreams, where they appear with luminous eyes, or stand at the edge of an unfamiliar forest, knowing instinctively that a deeper journey awaits. Allow me to share with you a dream I encountered in one of my patients many years ago. The dreamer was a highly sensitive young woman who had lived her life in compliance with expectations, always sacrificing her own needs for the comfort of others. She dreamed she was walking through a vast cathedral, the kind where light enters, not through windows, but through cracks in the ancient stone walls. At the center stood a shadowy figure, neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present. When she approached, the figure stepped aside, revealing a massive door with no handle, no keyhole, no visible opening mechanism. She hesitated, looking to the figure for guidance, but it only bowed its head. In that moment, the door opened inward without being touched. Behind it was not another room, but an open sky, vast and shimmering. When she awoke, she felt terrified, not because the dream seemed dark, but because it seemed too large. She sensed that stepping through that door would change everything. This dream, like many in the symbolic language of the unconscious, reveals the moment when the shadow stops obstructing and begins guiding. The figure stepping aside is the transition from resistance to initiation. The empath is approaching such a door now. The life that awaits you on the other side is not a life of perpetual exhaustion or emotional martyrdom. It is a life where your sensitivity is no longer a response to chaos, but a tool for creation. A life where your intuition is no longer defensive, but visionary. A life where the relationships that drain you fall away not by force, but by natural law, because the vibration of your becoming cannot coexist with the frequency of your old patterns. You must understand that the shadow tries to prevent your true life not out of malice, but out of memory. It remembers the moments when your openness made you vulnerable. It remembers the times when speaking your truth brought punishment. It remembers the fracturing of your identity when you were forced to prioritize others' needs over your own. And so it developed strategies, compliance, silence, self-erasure to guarantee your survival. But now, the very strategies that once protected you have become their own kind of prison. The empath cannot enter their destined life while carrying the emotional residues of their old one. This is why the shadow becomes active during periods of transition. It is not attacking you. It is presenting every unresolved fragment so that you may integrate it before crossing the threshold. You may feel old insecurities resurfacing, old fears intensifying, old relationships suddenly becoming unstable or distant. This is the psyche clearing the old architecture. What collapses now is not meant to be rebuilt. What resurfaces now is not meant to be reattached to your identity. This is a psychological shedding, a symbolic death, an inner eclipse where the old light fades to make room for the new. In mythic language, this is the moment the hero enters the underworld, not to retrieve something, but to surrender something. For the empath, what must be surrendered is the identity built around emotional burden. The shadow tries to convince you that without this identity you will have no value, no role, no belonging. But the self whispers a different truth, that your value does not come from carrying pain, but from transforming it. Let me now guide you into the deeper layers, for we are only at the threshold of understanding what it truly means for the empath to step into the life their shadow tried to prevent. The life that awaits you is not born of fear, but of alignment. Not of survival, but of inner sovereignty. As we move deeper into this exploration, I want you to sense the subtle movement occurring inside you, an inner shifting, like the slow rotation of a celestial body that has long been orbiting too close to someone else's gravity. The empath's life, until this moment, has often been shaped by gravitational pulls that were never truly theirs. Family expectations, emotional entanglements, ancestral wounds, social roles imposed too early, these forces all tugged on your orbit, shaping the trajectory of your choices. And the shadow, acting as the unconscious archivist of every painful memory, quietly ensured that you remained within a familiar pattern, even when that pattern was suffocating. But now something unprecedented is happening within you. The orbit is breaking, the center of gravity is shifting. And although the psyche rarely announces such changes with clarity, there is always a sensation, subtle, haunting, undeniable, that the ground beneath you is no longer the same. You may have felt it recently. A growing distance from people you once tolerated, a quiet refusal to participate in dynamics that drain you, a sudden clarity about patterns you endured for years. These experiences are not random. They are symptoms of individuation, the psychological process through which the self retrieves fragments of the soul, scattered across years of adaptation. The empath is particularly sensitive during this stage because you have spent much of your life living at the edge of your own boundaries, merging with others as a way of avoiding conflict or maintaining harmony. To individuate, then, is to reclaim what was exiled, your voice, your intuition, your desires, your truth. But the shadow does not surrender easily. Its final attempt to keep you in the old life often appears as inner conflict. You may feel pulled in two directions at once, one part of you yearning to step fully into your authentic existence, while another part resists, fearing the unknown. This is the tension of opposites, a crucial moment in psychological transformation. Whenever the psyche attempts to evolve beyond an outdated identity, two forces arise simultaneously, the force of expansion and the force of contraction. The empath tends to misinterpret contraction as failure or regression, but in truth, contraction is the psyche gathering its energy for a deeper push. It is the in-breath before the exhale that changes everything. Let me share with you a symbolic dream that often appears during this stage of transformation. Countless patients, empaths especially, report variations of the same vision. They find themselves walking along a narrow bridge suspended above a dark abyss. The air is cold, the wind sharp, and the bridge seems impossibly fragile. Ahead of them, a brilliant light glows at the far end, soft, golden, beckoning. But just as they move toward it, their feet become heavy, as if something is pulling them backward. When they look behind them, they see a figure cloaked in shadow, but this time the figure does not stand between them and the light. It clings to their ankle, not as an enemy, but as a frightened child who fears being abandoned. This is the shadow's truest form. Beneath all its defenses lies an inner child who learned long ago that survival meant suppression. It does not fear your destiny. It fears its own irrelevance. But the light at the far end of the bridge symbolizes the emergence of yourself, a life unburdened, unshackled, whole. The empath must step forward, not by rejecting the shadow, but by comforting it, acknowledging it, integrating it. You cannot defeat the shadow by force. You cannot outrun it. But you can hold it the way a parent holds a trembling child and say, "We are safe now. We can walk together." And it is here that a profound alchemical transformation begins. For when the empath stops resisting the shadow and instead listens to it, the relationship shifts. The shadow no longer acts as saboteur but as guide, revealing the very wounds that must be healed before the new life can be embodied. You may notice memories resurfacing, moments you thought you had forgotten or outgrown. Strange emotional echoes may appear out of nowhere. Sadness without a clear cause, anger that feels ancient, fear that does not belong to the present. These are not signs of regression, they are signs of integration. The psyche is offering back pieces of yourself that you once disowned in order to survive. When you begin to integrate these pieces, something extraordinary occurs. The empath's sensitivity becomes strength rather than liability. You begin to feel without absorbing. You begin to intuit without losing yourself in the energetic waves of others. You begin to speak truths you once swallowed. You begin to recognize when a connection is pulling you backward rather than forward. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to discern the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. In the old life, the life shaped by the shadow, the empath confused love with responsibility. You believed it was your job to heal, to soothe, to rescue, to understand. You felt morally obligated to hold the emotional weight of those around you, even when it cost you your well-being. But in the life you are stepping into, love transforms. It becomes a force rooted in sovereignty rather than sacrifice. You give not because you must, but because your soul overflows. You care not because you fear abandonment, but because your heart is grounded in truth. You help others not by absorbing their pain, but by reflecting their potential. This shift is monumental, and the psyche treats it as such. The unconscious begins preparing you by dismantling relationships and patterns that cannot follow you into this new chapter. You may find yourself withdrawing from long-standing friendships that suddenly feel misaligned. You may observe people projecting discomfort, insecurity, or resentment as you grow more rooted in your authenticity. This is because the empath's transformation destabilizes those who relied on your old identity. When you were small, manageable, compliant, and selfless, others remained comfortable. Now, as you expand, your very presence becomes a mirror for their unintegrated shadow. But do not fear this. The moment an empath steps into their true self, they begin attracting relationships that reflect their worth rather than their wounds. You will notice people entering your life who do not require you to shrink. People who do not feed on your energy but walk beside you as equals. People who support your boundaries instead of testing them. This is the life your shadow tried to prevent, because it never experienced such connections. Because it was built in environments where love was conditional, inconsistent, or emotionally dangerous. It assumed that any movement toward authenticity would lead to abandonment. But the reality is quite the opposite. Stepping into your authentic life brings you into alignment with those who can finally meet you at the level of your soul. Let me now turn our attention inward again, for the empath's transformation is not only relational but deeply intrapsychic. As you step into the life that was always meant for you, your inner architecture rearranges itself. Old narratives begin to crumble. The belief that you must earn love, that your needs are burdens, that your intuition is untrustworthy, that your emotions are too much. These narratives dissolve as the deeper self rises. This rising is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with grand lightning strikes. It feels more like the soft unfolding of dawn, a gradual illumination that reveals what has always been present but hidden in shadow. You may wake up one morning and realize you no longer desire the things you once chased. You may find that your nervous system feels calmer in situations that once overwhelmed you. You may discover that your priorities shift effortlessly toward what nourishes your spirit rather than what drains it. This is the psyche reorienting itself toward wholeness. But do not misunderstand. Every rebirth requires a symbolic death. Before the empath steps fully into their true life, the false self must dissolve. You will feel grief not just for what you lost, but for the years you lived away from your truth. Grief for the moments when you abandoned yourself just to be accepted. Grief for the love you gave to those who could not meet it. Grief for the versions of you that survived but never thrived. This grief is not an obstacle. It is the initiation. It prepares the ground for the new identity that is forming. And as this transformation deepens, you may experience a fascinating shift in your dreams. Archetypal images become more vivid, more symbolic, more mythic. You may see animals that represent instinct, wolves, serpents, lions, appearing not as threats but as guides. You may find yourself descending into caves or crossing rivers or confronting strangers who speak in riddles. The unconscious speaks to the empath with extraordinary clarity during this stage because your sensitivity allows you to receive the symbolic language without resistance. Pay attention to these dreams, for they reveal the instructions your waking mind has not yet grasped. Now let us touch the heart of the matter. The empath is about to step into a life governed not by fear, not by obligation, not by inherited trauma, but by the self. And the self has waited patiently, sometimes painfully, through every storm you survived. It whispered through synchronicities. It nudged you through intuition. It protected you even when you felt abandoned. And now, as the shadow loosens its grip, the self emerges with increasing strength, guiding you toward a destiny that only you can fulfill. You may not yet feel ready. You may still hear the echoes of doubt, the remnants of old beliefs. But readiness is not a prerequisite for transformation. Deep change occurs not when we feel prepared, but when the psyche determines that the time has come. And for you, my friend, the time has come. As you continue walking toward the life that calls you, you may notice that the landscape of your inner world is changing in ways both subtle and profound. Old triggers lose some of their power. Old wounds reveal new meanings. Old narratives unravel as if some invisible hand is gently loosening the knots that once held your psyche in confinement. This phase, often misunderstood, is the beginning of inner sovereignty, the moment when the self begins to take command of the psyche's inner kingdom. And for the empath, whose life has long been shaped by external forces, this is nothing short of revolutionary. You see, for most empaths, identity forms in reaction rather than creation. You learned who you were by sensing who others needed you to be. You shaped your emotional responses around the unpredictable weather of those around you. Your nervous system adapted to absorb tension before it erupted, to soothe people before they broke, to foresee dangers before they manifested. This reactive pattern made you highly attuned, but also internally fragmented. The empath learned to feel everything except themselves, and thus the shadow accumulated all the needs, truths, instincts, and desires you suppressed in order to maintain harmony. But now, as the self rises, it begins reclaiming the psychic territory that was long surrendered. This reclamation is not aggressive, it is organic, inevitable. It begins with clarity, the sudden recognition that certain habits no longer belong to you, that certain emotional responsibilities were never yours to carry, that certain relationships were built not on mutuality, but on dependency and projection. This clarity can feel disorienting at first. The empath has spent so long navigating by the compass of others' needs that turning inward to locate one's own truth feels like learning to see after living a lifetime in dim light. During this stage, many empaths experience what I call the return of the instinctual self. Instinct, a word often associated with danger or unpredictability, is in fact a sacred component of the psyche. Without instinct, intuition becomes ungrounded, and sensitivity becomes porous. Instinct is the animal wisdom within you, the force that knows when to move, when to rest, when to speak, when to withdraw. It is the part of the psyche that remembers your wholeness even when the ego forgets. When the shadow begins to integrate, instinct returns with surprising gentleness. You may notice yourself saying no without guilt. You may leave situations that once held you hostage. You may begin trusting your body more than the expectations of others. This is the restoration of psychic equilibrium. Let us explore this through the symbolic language of dreams once again. A recurring dream among individuals in this stage involves encountering an animal, sometimes a fox, sometimes a panther, sometimes an owl. The dreamer often feels unsure whether the creature is a friend or a threat. The animal watches them with piercing awareness, silent but present, as if assessing whether the dreamer is ready to claim something long withheld. When the dreamer approaches without fear, the animal often bows, steps aside, or leads them to a hidden path. This imagery is deeply archetypal. The animal represents instinct, returning to its rightful place within the psyche. It is the moment the empath stops living solely from the heart and begins allowing the body its wisdom, its boundaries, its impulses to rejoin the inner council. Yet, this awakening of instinct also triggers resistance from the ego, which is accustomed to the empath's self-sacrificial patterns. The ego may attempt to negotiate with the old identity, saying things like, "You're becoming selfish," "People won't like this version of you," or "You're pushing too many people away." But these fears are remnants of conditioning, not truths. A self-respecting empath is not selfish, they are sovereign. A boundary-setting empath is not harsh, they are aligned. A discerning empath is not distant, they are finally choosing relationships grounded in reciprocity rather than emotional extraction. And it is at this juncture, when instinct returns, when clarity sharpens, when boundaries emerge organically, that something extraordinary occurs. The shadow shifts its role from protector to initiator. For years, it guarded you by restricting you. Now it guards you by revealing truth. This shift can feel like a sudden unveiling. People you once trusted may show their true nature. Patterns you once thought normal may appear absurd. The roles you played in your family or relationships may feel like costumes that no longer fit. This unveiling is not cruelty, it is liberation. When the shadow becomes initiator, it brings the empath face to face with their authentic destiny. Destiny, in psychological terms, is not a predestined path, but the natural unfolding of one's true nature, once all distortions are removed. For the empath, destiny has always been entangled with service, but service grounded in compassion, not compulsion. You were never meant to heal people at the cost of your own well-being. You were never meant to shrink so others could feel more comfortable. You were never meant to deny your intuition so others could maintain their illusions. These distortions existed because the shadow, shaped by childhood wounds, believed they were necessary for survival. Now, as the shadow integrates, you begin to act from authenticity rather than adaptation. This shift also restructures your relationship with pain. The empath's old life was dominated by pain, absorbed pain, inherited pain, projected pain, unspoken pain. Pain served as the primary language of connection. But in the life you are stepping into, pain becomes teacher rather than identity. You are no longer defined by the wounds you carry or the wounds you heal in others. Instead, pain reveals the path toward greater consciousness. It shows you where you abandoned yourself, where you accepted less than you deserved, where you mistook endurance for love. And once these revelations occur, pain loses its power to imprison you. You may notice during this phase that your energy shifts dramatically. Empaths often speak of feeling lighter, clearer, even physically stronger as they detach from old energetic bonds. This is not imagined. The psyche, when no longer burdened by roles that suffocate it, frees the body from the chronic tension it once held. You may find your breath deepening, your posture changing, your sleep becoming more restorative. This is somatic integration, when the body finally receives the message that you are no longer living in emotional warfare. But perhaps the most astonishing transformation occurs in your perception. The empath begins to see the world not through the lens of their wounded self, but through the eyes of their self. The self perceives the symbolic nature of reality. It recognizes that every experience, whether joyful or painful, has meaning. It sees synchronicities as guidance rather than coincidence. It interprets emotional shifts as indicators of alignment rather than personal flaws. This symbolic perception is the hallmark of an awakened psyche. Let me share another pattern that emerges during this stage. Synchronicities increase. You may see repeating numbers. You may meet people who articulate truths you were just beginning to understand. You may encounter books, dreams, or messages that align perfectly with your inner process. This is not magical thinking. The psyche, when aligned, perceives patterns that were always present but previously obscured by fear and fragmentation. The world becomes a mirror reflecting your inner evolution. And for the empath whose intuitive radar has always been finely tuned, this stage feels like stepping into a reality that finally speaks the same language you do. But remember, the shadow does not disappear. It transforms. It becomes an advisor rather than a jailer. The empath begins to consult the shadow not with fear but with curiosity. It reveals ancestral wounds. It exposes generational patterns. It uncovers suppressed emotions you did not know were yours. This is the descent into the underworld, an archetypal journey that every awakened individual must undergo. But you descend not to suffer. You descend to retrieve the lost pieces of your own soul. Many empaths carry wounded archetypes, particularly those related to the mother, the father, the healer, or the innocent. Healing these archetypes does not mean rewriting the past. It means reclaiming the power that was lost within those archetypal patterns. For example, healing the mother archetype does not require having had a nurturing mother. It requires integrating the part of you that longs for nourishment, softness, safety, and inner warmth. Healing the father archetype does not require a perfect father. It requires integrating the part of you that seeks guidance, stability, and authority. These integrations allow the empath to form a new psychic foundation, one built on inner security rather than external approval. As this foundation strengthens, you will feel less drawn to chaos. Drama becomes unattractive. Dysfunction feels foreign. Emotional volatility no longer seduces you. Why? Because when the psyche stabilizes, it no longer resonates with environments that destabilize. For the first time in your life, peace will feel familiar rather than suspicious. Stillness will feel safe rather than empty. And solitude will feel nourishing rather than lonely. This transformation is the very thing your shadow tried to prevent, not because it wanted you to suffer, but because it had never known a reality where safety came from authenticity rather than adaptation. But now the psyche recognizes that safety lies in alignment. That connection built on truth is stronger than connection built on compliance, and that the life awaiting you is infinitely larger than the one you were conditioned to tolerate. You may not yet see the full shape of this new life. Transformation rarely reveals its destination in advance, but you can feel it, the subtle pull towards something more expansive, more honest, more soul-aligned. This pull is the self calling you home. And now we arrive at the deepest threshold, the liminal crossing, where the empath steps fully into the life that has been waiting in the inner world for many years. At this point in the journey, the psyche begins to reorganize itself around a new center. The self becomes the axis, the still point around which every instinct, intuition, emotion, and memory rotates in harmony rather than conflict. This is not a philosophical idea, but a profound psychological event. When the empath begins living from the self rather than the shadow, a new inner order emerges, a quiet yet powerful authority that guides life from within rather than from external conditions. You may notice this shift in the way you move through the world. You speak more slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of certainty. You choose more deliberately, not out of fear, but out of alignment. You listen more deeply, not because you are absorbing others, but because you are present within yourself. This presence is magnetic. It radiates in ways that others feel even if they cannot name it. Those who once overlooked you may suddenly sense something different, something undeniable. They may not understand that what they are noticing is not a change in your personality, but the emergence of your wholeness. Wholeness is not perfection. It is the sacred integration of all parts, the light you show the world and the shadow you once hid from it. When these parts unite, the empath becomes sovereign, no longer pulled into the emotional currents of others, no longer scattered across responsibilities that were never theirs, no longer fragmented by childhood conditioning. The empath stands in their authentic center. This is what the shadow feared, that once you reclaimed your wholeness, you would no longer need to negotiate your value through suffering. And yet, as you awaken into this new phase, life around you begins responding. You may notice relationships shifting with greater intensity than before. People who once depended on your compliance may resist your transformation. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, becoming unfeeling, even becoming cruel. But understand this clearly. It is not cruelty to stop living in a way that harms your soul. It is not harshness to withdraw from those who only approached you to take. It is not unkindness to choose solitude over emotional extraction. When you step into your true self, you will outgrow certain dynamics by necessity, not by intention. And yet, for every relationship that falls away, a new one is drawn toward you. Relationships built on recognition rather than projection, resonance rather than dependency, truth rather than illusion. For the first time, the empath will encounter connections that do not fracture under the weight of authenticity. You will meet individuals who speak the same psychological and spiritual language, who do not fear your depth, who do not shrink from your intuition, who do not depend on your self-erasure. These relationships are not accidental. They are the natural consequence of living in alignment with the self. Allow me to illuminate this with another symbolic dream pattern common among those undergoing this transformation. The dreamer often finds themselves in a vast forest, the air thick with mist. They walk for what feels like hours until they reach a clearing where a circle of figures dressed in white stand silently, waiting. These figures represent aspects of the self, different expressions of your future potential, each holding a part of the life awaiting you. When the dreamer steps into the center of the circle, the mist clears, revealing a path marked by stones that glow faintly. The path does not show its end, but it shows the next step. And that is enough. This dream represents the moment when the psyche's internal allies reveal themselves. You are no longer navigating instinctively through survival patterns. You are navigating with inner guidance. The path does not unfold all at once, because individuation is not a destination, but a constant unfolding. The empath, attuned to subtlety, learns to trust the next step even without seeing the entire map. This trust is a profound departure from the fear-driven intuition that governed the old life. Here, intuition becomes a compass rooted in sovereignty. During this stage, another phenomenon emerges. Your creativity deepens. Creativity, psychologically speaking, is the expression of the self. When the shadow is unintegrated, creativity becomes distorted. Self-doubt, fear of failure, fear of visibility, fear of misjudgment, all obstructed. But when the empath integrates the shadow, creativity becomes a channel for truth. You may find yourself drawn to writing, painting, music, or any medium that allows the unconscious to speak freely. This creative flow is not merely artistic. It is the psyche revealing new dimensions of identity. You may also notice that silence becomes different. Where silence once felt heavy or lonely, now it feels sacred. Silence becomes a container for inner dialogue, a place where intuition sharpens, where the self speaks with unusual clarity. Solitude no longer feels like exile. It feels like home. And this shift is essential, for the empath's true life cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, cannot be built upon noise or distraction. It must emerge from inner stillness. As you grow deeper into this transformation, you may experience a strange sense of déjà vu, as though the life you are stepping into is not new but remembered. This is because the self has always held your potential life within it, waiting for the moment when consciousness could align with it. You are not becoming someone new, you are returning to someone ancient within you, someone who existed long before the conditioning that shaped your wounds, someone who remembers why you were born with such unusual sensitivity, someone who does not fear your depth, because that depth is your essence. Let us speak now of the empath's purpose, for every transformation carries with it a calling. The empath is not meant to live small. You are not meant to remain hidden in the corners of relationships that drain you. You are not meant to silence your intuition so others can remain asleep. You are not meant to deny your vision so others can remain comfortable. Your purpose is not to absorb suffering, but to transmute it. Not to carry the unconsciousness of others, but to awaken your own. The life your shadow tried to prevent is a life where you embody your authentic energy without apology. It is a life where your intuition is trusted, your boundaries are sacred, your voice is honored, your desires are valid, your instincts are reliable, and your heart is no longer a battlefield. It is a life where you can finally breathe without monitoring the emotional climate around you. It is a life where you can love without self-erasure. It is a life where you can create without fear. It is a life where you walk with clarity, dignity, and psychic groundedness. And this new life also contains something more subtle, more mysterious. When the empath fully integrates the shadow, they begin to radiate a presence that others feel even in silence. This presence is not loud. It is not forceful. It does not demand attention. Instead, it emanates from a deep center of gravity within the soul. People cannot quite name what they feel, but they feel it nonetheless. They feel steadiness. They feel depth. They feel truth. They feel mystery. This presence is the signature of individuation. It is the psychological equivalent of spiritual maturity. To illustrate this, let me share one final dream pattern. Many empaths who complete this threshold dream of standing on a mountaintop at dawn. The air is crisp. The world is silent. They look out across the horizon and realize they are seeing farther than they ever have. Not in the literal sense, but in the symbolic sense. The mountaintop represents perspective, the vantage point of the self. From this height, old problems appear small, old wounds appear resolvable, old fears appear powerless. The dreamer often wakes with a feeling not of relief, but of recognition. They recognize that they have reached an inner height they once believed inaccessible. This recognition marks the culmination of the empath's transformation. It is the moment when the self no longer whispers but speaks clearly. The moment when the shadow no longer hinders but protects. The moment when the ego no longer panics but follows. At this point, the empath is ready to step into the life the shadow tried to prevent, not through force, not through rebellion, not through abandonment of the past, but through integration. And what is integration, if not the art of becoming whole? You have descended into the underworld of your own unconscious. You have confronted the fragments of your identity scattered across years of survival. You have stepped through symbolic doors that frightened you. You have reclaimed instincts, boundaries, truth, creativity, presence, and sovereignty. You have met your shadow and discovered not an enemy, but a wounded guardian. You have awakened the self, which has been waiting patiently through every storm, every heartbreak, every silence. And now, as you stand at the threshold of this new life, you feel something you have rarely felt: inner certainty. This certainty is your compass. It does not shout. It does not negotiate. It does not depend on validation. It simply knows. It knows who you are becoming. It knows what you are leaving behind. It knows which relationships align and which do not. It knows where your soul is calling you. And it knows that the life ahead of you is not only possible but inevitable. And so, my dear friend, The empath is not just about to step into a new life. They are about to step into their true life. A life liberated from unconscious contracts, released from inherited burdens, and aligned with the deepest, oldest, most authentic part of their being. The life your shadow tried to prevent has finally arrived, and you are ready. When the empath rises, their creativity awakens. Their voice sharpens. Their path becomes visible. Their boundaries become sacred. Their presence becomes transformative. Their life becomes symbolic. They begin to understand that everything they lived through was preparation for this emergence. You are not rising into someone new. You are rising into someone ancient, someone true, someone whole, someone powerful. The strongest version of you has been waiting beneath the layers of inherited pain, beneath the patterns you carried for others, beneath the illusions you outgrew, beneath the wounds you survived. It has been waiting in the depths, in the unconscious, in the shadow, in the dreams you forgot, in the instincts you suppressed. Now, it steps forward, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with presence. The empath rises when the soul becomes too large for the cage that once contained it. And you, my friend, are standing at the edge of that cage. The door is open. The self is calling. The world is shifting. And your time has come